Welcome back, mutants. Shribo here with you for another vlog update, or webcast if you prefer. I thought I was well past due for bringing you my top Leung films, also Chia Liang films if you prefer. For some reason I latched on to Leung. That was the name I mostly knew him by. For those of you that don't know, Leung recently passed away. He's one of the all-time great martial arts choreographers, directors, writers, kind of in that order. He's one of those guys that was the offshoot of the Peking Opera and had just been trained in everything and found his way into film. Now, this isn't any kind of comprehensive overview or study of the man's life or anything, but my understanding was his first work was with Chang Che and Shaw Brothers Studios, and he eventually broke off from that and made films at other places, all the way up to the modern era with modern hits like Jackie Chan's Drunken Master 2, or as it was released in America, Legend of the Drunken Master. Released in America, by the way, years and years after its initial release in Hong Kong, so it's funny how that works and things flip around like that. But in this video, I'm going to bring you my top 5 Leung films. These are hardcore kung fu films, you know, most of the time period piece, full-on classical styles, just great hand-to-hand combat, great weapon usage, just true kung fu displayed across the board. The interesting thing about Leung is I remember seeing an interview with him. I'm trying to remember the name of the documentary, but I see so many documentaries over the years. I tend to forget the titles of them after a while. But he said, in his opinion, there were only ever 5 real kung fu movies made, and he didn't count his own. He said they were all of Bruce Lee's movies. He said those are the only movies where you really see kung fu. So I just thought that was an interesting observation on his part. But I had to put some red herrings in the title, but you will not see Legendary Weapons of China in my top 5, or Mad Monkey Kung Fu, or even One-Armed Swordsman, which was my understanding was his first choreography job, working with Chang Che. Is this Shaw Brothers? Maybe it's not Shaw Brothers. Yeah, it's Shaw Brothers. There's the SB down at the bottom. The movie that made Jimmy Wang Yu a superstar by the great Chinese director Chang Che. The cat's trying to get out. If I don't let her out, she's going to be a pain in the butt through this whole vlog, this whole webcast. Not in my top 5. Now, the funny thing is, now Phil K might pop in and at any time and will say that my tastes have changed and my top 5 picks change, but I can only attribute that to being a human. You know, as people, we change every day. We learn, we grow, you know, we see things differently just due to our experience changing us in one way or another. But in my opinion, all of these top 5 Leung films are all top 10 worthy. So the arrangement within that top 10, or that top 5 rather, is just strictly a matter of taste. Ones that I think better reach an audience, so to speak. Let's say it in that way. Because all the movies have their kind of perfect blend of kung fu and wuxia on display. But I think perhaps some are more accessible to audiences than others. And since these are movies, which means they are intended for audiences, these are not just things that are supposed to exist for their own sake. They're supposed to reach the masses. So I suppose in my mind, the one that seems the most accessible is the one that I will rank the highest, so to speak. Now, I do want to show one thing before I get into my countdown. Check this out. This is how long I've been hunting these movies down. You know, essentially I watched these as a kid on TV. Because every Saturday, growing up as a kid in Mississippi, Saturday was the day that I could watch TV. And as a kid in the 70s and 80s, that meant there were cartoons playing on Saturday. It was the one day of the week you could do something, and nobody was expecting you to do chores or do this or do that, or even do your homework, or it was Saturday morning was your time, and being able to watch those old cartoons and just kind of TV as the day went on in the early day was just a great thing. It was a great feeling, watching everything from, God help it, the Smurfs, which I mainly only watched because it was on. There was nothing else on back then. There are essentially 3 channels to choose from, 4 once Fox came around. But you had things like Dungeons and Dragons, the Tarzan show, Flash Gordon, Super Friends, Legends of the Super Friends, Challenge of the Super Friends, the GoBots, the Mighty Orbots. Just the list goes on and on and on. Just mix and match all the different cartoons. But that gave way into the Doctor Who hour, which started usually around noon, and then hour, but it was a solid full installment of Doctor Who, usually comprised of 4 short half-hour episodes. So it was a 2-hour show. That gave way into Black Belt Theater. And as a kid, this is just the greatest thing ever. Here you are seeing these guys, fighting hand to hand, full combat with weaponry, chopping each other up. If you're watching a Chang Che flick, if you're watching Lau Kar Leung stuff, you're just getting mesmerized by the display of weaponry, just the dexterity and the control, and of course there was just the brutal aspect to it all. And then even some movies had this weird tone to them, like something like the 5 Deadly Venoms, which I mentioned before on here as being my favorite Chop Socky flick, has this weird gothic tone to it. So it's almost like a horror film meets a kung fu film meets a superhero film. Very bizarre movie, which I suppose is what makes it my favorite. But for the longest time, you could only find these on bootleg VHS. They were very, very hard to find, unless your mom and pop's video store had them. Kids nowadays don't even know what mom and pop video stores are. But my understanding, this is a bootleg of a UK version. You have the UK rating on there. It's got a 15 rating. It's just a straight hardcore VHS copy. Now I finally have DVD. I got this in a 4-pack, by the way. Okay, my top 5. Let's count down. There's a couple things you're going to notice about some of these selections in just Lau Kar Leung movies in particular, and that is that they almost always, invariably, the best ones star Gordon Liu, who was his brother, who was really a half-brother, who was a member of the same Peking opera troupe that he was a member of. Another trademark of the Chia Liang film work, Lau Kar Leung, was that they always open with this almost surreal, abstract the way it's presented, just a fight scene or a training sequence or something. They always kind of introduce the weaponry and the kung fu or the abilities of the opponents and the players in the field during an introduction sequence that's usually just totally devoid of plot. It's just training, what have you. And I say surreal because it's usually, it looks like something on a stage where there's just the backdrop is just saturated in lighting, whether it's all green or all red or whatever. There's no landscape or setting, so to speak of. Nothing to discern it from anything other than dream space, But you see this enactment of these amazing kung fu sequences, whether it's empty hand or weaponry, and it would always set up what was going to be at play in the later movie. And it's just one of his hallmarks, one of his trademarks. All right, number 5. Of course, starring Gordon Liu, Dirty Ho, one of the funniest titles, unintentionally funny. In the movie, Dirty Ho is a jewel thief. That's this guy over here, who eventually becomes an apprentice to him, Wang, who is actually one of the 9 princes who has gone undercover to just hide and travel, and he's pretending to be a wine vendor, and he's going to wine tastings and this and that, just because he wants to travel and he enjoys the culture. All the while, one of his evil brothers is trying to kill him. Eventually, they team up and try to find out who's trying to kill him, and see which one of his brothers is going to ascend to the throne. Amazing movie. Truly ingenious kung fu fight sequences. One sequence when Wang is defending himself from Ho when they first meet, and they're having the obligatory, Stanley Marvel, we don't know each other, so we must fight scene. Wang gets behind this minstrel girl who's they're playing, shamisen or whatever she's playing, and he gets behind her and he manipulates her limbs and makes it look like she's fighting Ho, and the illusion is successful in the way that Ho doesn't realize that he's being deceived. He thinks this girl is his bodyguard fighting him, and he's just standing behind her, almost operating her like a puppet, making her limbs move and whatnot. It's just great sequences. I mean, all filled throughout. There's one sequence where the prince, they try to assassinate the prince, and he goes to a wine tasting, and he's battling with the wine vendor there, and they're pretending not to fight while they're fighting. It's just, you just have to see it to believe it. Again, 10/10. These are all amazing, fantastic films, and and that's something Bruce Lee would never be able to give you, that kind of kung fu through another person, or fighting without fighting, so to speak, as he does. Okay, Executioners from Shaolin, number 4. This is the quintessential Pai Mei movie. I should have brought my my White Hermit action figure out, because I've got the Kill Bill era Pai Mei figure. It's on one of my bookshelves in the other room. But this was the movie that started it, introduced us to the character of Pai Mei. Pai Mei being the all-powerful White Hermit, who was invulnerable, could strike you in your weak spots and whatnot. Reappeared in Kill Bill, for those of you kids out there who don't believe anything was made before 1990. Just classic fight sequences. I think it begins with the burning of the Shaolin Temple. The monks are escaping. They break up. Survivors go out across the lands. Where is it? They join up with the red fleet, the red junket. What's it called? My history's not perfect on all these things, so don't look at these videos as any kind of comprehensive overview. It's just it's an invitation to you to, if you find anything interesting in any of these discussions, to seek them out and learn more about them. So that's famous story of the Shaolin Temple being destroyed. One couple teams up, and he's a master of the tiger style, and his wife's a master of the crane style, and eventually the young son grows up, learns crane from the mother, and secretly learns tiger from the father's manual and whatnot, and goes and seeks revenge on Pai Mei the White Hermit. So good stuff. Executioners from Shaolin. Number 3, again starring Gordon Liu. Gordon Liu, and by the way, was not in a starring role in Executioners from Shaolin, but he appears in the very beginning. Alright, but he does return to the 36 Chamber, which is one of my all-time favorites, which is why it's number 3 on the best Lau Kar-Leung movies, or my favorite Lau Kar-Leung. I can't distinguish between best and favorite. I mean, it's just such a weird thing. But this is a really fun one, and in tone, it's very humorous throughout. Essentially, the story of a young con man who gets hired by these factory workers to try to trick their boss, or threaten him, or intimidate him into treating them better, improving worker conditions, returning their pay to what it was before, because the factory owner hired some Manchus, the evil Manchus, to come in and work as crew leaders, and they wind up cutting the wages of all the Chinese workers. So Chinese workers are trying to get justice and whatnot. Well, this guy's not a real Shaolin monk. He just pretends to be. Eventually gets discovered. He gets run out of town, and he sneaks his way into the Shaolin Temple. This is a follow-up to the original 36 Chamber of Shaolin, aka Master Killer, aka Shaolin Master Killer. He sneaks into the temple, asks the monks to train him, and they refuse. But they say, but you can work on our roof. You can repair the roof. So the entire time that he's repairing the roof, he's actually watching the monks train and do the kung fu and stuff. And you can see here he's got his roof ties, whatever these are. It's just straw, just reeds, whatever he's using, thin rope to latch the roof back together. And he creates kind of his own style of kung fu. And after he rebuilds the roof long enough, he learns kung fu and he leaves and he goes and he acts as the arm of justice for the oppressed factory workers. Very fun installment in the Chamber series, so to speak. An interesting departure for Gordon Liu, who goes and meets the character that he played in the first movie. By the way, is number 2 on this list, 36th Chamber of Shaolin. This is the one that started it all. This is the one you probably thought I was going to have as number 1. That's why my number 1 pick might be controversial for a few people. But this is the quintessential Shaolin monk movie where Gordon Liu is a young student. He gets caught up in the revolution against the Qings, and when he's overheard making anti-Qing comments in the crowds, he essentially gets chased out of town because he's thought to be a rebel and a rabble rouser, and he gets chased out of town very much for fear of his own life. And he takes refuge at the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, again sneaking in, much like in Return to the 36th Chamber, but this happened first here. He's playing the legendary Sante, and he trains in the various chambers of Shaolin, and this is the movie where it all comes from, where they show the, in many cases, authentic Shaolin training, and he explores the various weaponry and whatnot. At one point, even inventing his own weapon to help him advance through the chambers, because he has to defeat one of the teachers, and he can't beat him with the weapons he has available to himself. So he makes a new weapon. It's just a brilliant movie all the way through. It just chronicles his evolution as a monk and his return to the world, I guess, essentially as a bodhisattva. Because even though he did reach enlightenment, he returned to the world to help bring justice to the oppressed. 36th Chamber of Shaolin, aka Master Killer, who's not really a killer, although he did kill when he had to. Shaolin Master Killer. And here we go. Number 1. What does it have in common with all the others? Gordon Liu. Heroes of the East, aka Shaolin Challenges Ninja. My absolute favorite, my vote for the best Lau Kar-Leung movie of all time. And a lot of times when I mention my favorite kung fu movies of all time, this will come up as number 1 or 2. It's always up there in the top. In this one, Gordon Liu plays a young Chinese noble who's put into an arranged marriage with a Japanese girl, and it's a marriage that is beneficial for both families, where they both gain prestige and standing from it. But at first he doesn't want to be a part of it. But once he sees her and he meets her and he sees that she's beautiful, he's like, okay, I will meet her after all. So they get married and they go back to their home, and he finds out that she is a proponent of Japanese martial arts, whereas he is a proponent of Chinese martial arts. And he comes across her studying, and she's wearing her various gis and doing judo throws and karate board breaks and punching the house apart and kicking the columns in the courtyard or what have you. And they get into this kind of philosophical debate between which style of combat is better. The Japanese, usually hard-hitting styles, or the Chinese, the softer, more pliant styles. And it's just a fascinating movie because she eventually gets mad and she leaves, like all women do. She leaves, heads back home to Japan, where she goes and stays with her family. And when Gordon Liu's character, what's his name, Hato or something, I think, Hato, follows her back to Japan, her old friends who are all ninjas in training, or ninja masters or what have you. They're like, you leave her alone. She came back here. So he returns home and he writes this letter, and he says, Chinese martial arts are better, and I defy you to prove me wrong, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. But anyway, he does it as a ploy to bring her back home, but it winds up getting in the hands of the Japanese. The Japanese feel affronted, and they accept the challenge, and it begins this long duel between Hato and all the Japanese martial arts masters. They've got the sword master, the nunchaku master, the staff master, and this and that and that and this, all the way on to the final battle with the ninja master, which is just a phenomenal battle. And something that happens in this movie never happened before or since, to my knowledge, in any kind of kung fu or wuxia movie, and that nobody dies in this. You know, all the confrontations are just kind of, you know, friendly sparring matches, almost, even when they're using real weaponry. You know, every time Hato gets the upper hand on his opponent, you know, there's always like a sparring, and they just kind of acknowledge what happened and they go on from it. There's no bloodshed in the movie, and it's truly fascinating. And I opened the video by saying, you know, I rank them kind of according to accessibility, and I just think, even though a lot of people absolutely love 36 Chamber of Shaolin, it's the quintessential monk movie, you know, I think Heroes of the East, aka Shaolin Challenges Ninja, is just one that's more accessible to a wider audience and just a better story, so to speak. I mean, I think both males and females can watch it and enjoy it and really get something out of it. So, there you go. Those are my thoughts on my favorite or the best Lau Kar-Leung movies ever. If I had a good copy, I might put Drunken Master 2 into the mix there somewhere, because it's one of the most brilliant Jackie Chan movies ever made. And I guess, again, of course, largely in part due to the brilliance of Chia Liang, Lau Kar-Leung. May he rest in peace. Thank you, Master, for all of the great stories that you shared with us, and you know, perhaps we'll all join in the great beyond one day, and you will share many more with us.